The door clicks shut while his shadow stays perfectly still beside her trembling glass, and the room holds its breath in a way that makes time flatten into something thin and breakable as I stand just beyond the edge of their awareness, the present tense of the moment tightening around my ribs like a drawn wire while the trembling glass on the counter quivers against the faint hum of the vents. A small vibration that feels louder than any confession they could give because it reveals how sharply the air has shifted. I focus on the narrow cut of light slashing across the hardwood, dividing the space into two truths, the one I thought I lived in, and the one unfolding in front of me as their bodies hover too close, their movements rehearsed in a way that tells me this is not the first time they've stood in this geometry of guilt. And I breathe slowly, not because I'm calm, but because breathing is the only action that doesn't expose the storm swelling inside my chest. The storm. I refuse to let leak into this scene, not yet, not while stillness holds more power than sound. Her fingers hover near the stem of the glass as if debating whether to grip or flee. His shoulders settle into an unnatural ease, and the stillness of his shadow feels like a practiced betrayal, a quiet shape that's already learned to lie in darkness. So I stay silent, letting the truth arrange itself without interference, because silence is sharper than confrontation when used correctly. Silence is the knife that doesn't swing, but still draws blood. And I watch the way he shifts his weight a fraction to the left, as if aware of a disturbance at his back, but unwilling to acknowledge it, unwilling to acknowledge me, the person he vowed to choose before rooms like this existed, before shadows could tell the story he hides. I let the trembling glass anchor me, its vibrations syncing with the pulse in my neck as I absorb the details, the controlled lift of his chin, the way her breath catches in her throat, the tension that gathers in the space between them like a held secret, begging to fall apart, the moral fracture exposed by nothing more than where the light lands and where it refuses to go. And for a moment I imagine speaking, letting the accusation roll out and crush the scene. But I hold it back, because the truth deserves to expand on its own without being rushed. And I need this moment, this unbroken capture of who they are when they think no one's looking, burned into my memory without distortion. And so I remain still absorbing them as they are, rather than as they pretend to be, letting the details settle in a quiet that feels almost sacred in its severity. A silence I know I'll return to later when the consequences come, because consequences always come, especially for people who misjudge the strength of a person standing silently in a doorway, watching everything they tried to hide take shape under a slice of unforgiving light. Her shoulder brushes his as she moves slightly. His hand lifts just a bit too naturally toward hers, and the trembling glass quivers again as though the air itself shudders at the sight, and I stand rooted, watching recording, committing each movement to an internal ledger. I never planned on keeping, but now cannot ignore. And the longer I remain, the more I understand that this moment is not about catching them. It's about confirming the truth. I already sensed the truth that crawled beneath my skin weeks ago, the truth that waited in the quiet with me, wordless but certain. And now that I see it fully, I don't feel the explosion they probably expect if they were to turn and discover me. Instead, I feel a cold clarity settling in, a clarity that says the time for confrontation isn't now, it's later. In a place where every detail can be used, where every shadow and every vibration from this trembling glass will have a purpose. Because I'm not here for drama. I'm here for precision, and precision requires patience. So I let the room stay frozen, let the truth breathe, without interruption. Let the betrayal stand unmasked for a full, quiet moment that stretches long enough to make the air taste different, metallic and honest in its devastation. And I know they don't hear me, don't sense me, don't understand that everything in their bodies is speaking louder than their voices ever could. I retreat one step back, letting the cut of light fall between us like a silent verdict, and I don't exhale until I'm sure they're still lost in each other, unaware that the moment has already ended for them and begun for me. Some truths don't need sound to break a person open. The trembling glass keeps shaking long after I walk away. Morgan steps back into the hallway, feeling the weight of the door's click echo down the spine of the house. I'm Morgan Blake, 41, a high school English teacher from Richmond, Virginia, and the morning after that frozen scene, everything in the house felt slightly misplaced, as if the walls themselves had learned a new language overnight. And when I stepped into the hallway, the first thing I noticed was the slightly ajar door to Ethan's office, hanging in that same half-open posture it had taken on in recent months, a posture I once thought was absent-mindedness, but now recognized as a symptom, a small fracture hiding a larger one. I pushed it gently, but it refused to close fully, catching on something unseen, and the resistance felt like the house whispering a truth. I wasn't ready to hear, a truth that had followed me into sleep, stirring in the back of my mind until the early light made me sit up and breathe in the quiet, steadying myself for the day, because pretending nothing had changed was easier than admitting everything had. I walked into the kitchen, where the air still held a faint scent of last night's tension, a stale quiet that wasn't normal for a Saturday. Ethan was already dressed, moving with that calculated casualness he used when he wanted to be perceived as unbothered. He hummed lightly off-key, inconsistent, and I knew instantly that it wasn't real humming, just a filler noise to keep me from hearing the silence around him. When he turned, his smile stretched a second too long, his eyes landing not on me, but somewhere beside me, and the moment felt like the universe nudging a pressure point. We talked about nothing, coffee errands, weather, and every word felt like drywall smoothing over a hole large enough to swallow the room. I watched him pour milk into his mug, the carton trembling slightly in his hand, and in the tiny shake, I caught the first behavioral evidence, nothing formal, nothing admissible, but something real. He was afraid of something, or of me, or of what might happen if I noted the wrong detail. Ethan leaned against the counter, pretending ease, but his shoulders were too tight, positioned like a lie waiting for its cue. And when he asked whether I slept well, his tone had the softness of someone afraid to disturb a sleeping threat. I answered yes, though the truth was murkier, wrapped in memories of light slicing across the floor and shadows that didn't move when they should have. That image replayed in my mind, not like a trauma, but like a fact, cold, fixed, unavoidable. As I sipped my coffee, I caught myself straightening the edge of a placemat, a nervous micro-habit I'd developed over years of trying to maintain order where emotion didn't fit. Ethan noticed the gesture, and something in his face flickered recognition guilt or anticipation, I couldn't tell which. The motif seed slipped into my awareness unexpectedly, uninvited, like a tiny warning twitch beneath my ribs. A pulse skips in the quiet space between us. It was small, almost insignificant, yet charged with something I didn't have a name for. It wasn't pain, it wasn't fear. It was more like the body acknowledging what the mind hasn't spoken yet. When he stepped closer, reaching behind me to grab the sugar jar, the air shifted, and I felt the pulse skip again, slightly stronger, nudging me toward the truth I wasn't ready to confront. He asked if I wanted to go out for brunch, his voice dipping into that careful register he used when trying to steer conversations away from real territory. I told him I had work to catch up on. He nodded too quickly, too relieved, and in that relief was another crack. Harper's name hovered unsaid between us, not because he mentioned her, but because he didn't, because the silence around her was shaped too intentionally to be coincidence. When Ethan left the room, I stood alone in the kitchen, feeling the quiet stretch thin. The slightly ajar door down the hall caught my eye again, holding its crooked position like a crooked truth, waiting for someone to stop pretending. I walked toward it slowly, not because I feared what I'd find, but because I feared what I already knew. Inside Ethan's office looked the same as always, orderly, curated, precise, but something felt off. A disturbed pen, a shifted notebook, a faint smell of his cologne that didn't match the time he claimed he last worked in here. I ran my fingers lightly across the desk surface and felt a coldness that didn't belong in morning warmth. My pulse steadied, then skipped again, a soft internal tap like a finger knocking from the inside. Human bodies rarely lie. They just wait. As I stepped back into the hallway, the cut of morning light from the window fell across my feet, thin and sharp. I didn't chase answers. I didn't dig through drawers or call anyone or unravel last night with questions he'd swat away. Not yet. Today was for watching, noting, storing. The truth was already beginning to thread itself together quietly without help from me. He reacts like a man terrified of the story his silence might tell. The slightly ajar door feels like it's waiting for me to notice what's behind it. I spent most of the next afternoon pretending the house was just a house, pretending the air didn't carry the thick aftertaste of what I'd walked in on, pretending that the silence between Ethan and me was simply routine instead of loaded. But the longer I moved through the rooms, the heavier everything felt, as if each object had learned to hold its breath with me. I tried sorting laundry, wiping down surfaces, even stepping outside to breathe the cold, but nothing settled. When I walked back into Ethan's office near dusk, the light hit the desk with a sharp, angled slash that reminded me too much of the night before, and that's when I saw it. A small yellow sticky note stuck to the edge of his monitor, its corner curling slightly, its position too deliberate to be accidental. The handwriting was rushed, unfamiliar, not Ethan's tidy block lettering. It simply read, "Callback 7," with a tiny loop on the question mark that didn't match his style at all. I stared at it longer than I intended, wondering if the 7 meant 7 o'clock or something else, wondering why it felt like it didn't belong in this room he curated so carefully. I lifted it gently, noting the faint warmth under the adhesive, as if it had been placed there not long ago, and for a moment I imagined Harper standing here writing it, placing it, thinking she'd been careful enough to leave no trace. The idea burned colder than anger. I set the sticky note down, not returning it to its spot, and sat in Ethan's chair. The leather still held his shape. The computer screen reflected the cut of light on the desk, a thin, bright line that sliced through the surface like a boundary I wasn't supposed to cross. I tapped the mouse once. The screen woke instantly, and for a second I considered backing away, but something stronger kept me still. The desktop was clean except for an open browser window minimized in the corner. Ethan was always meticulous about closing tabs, deleting histories, reshaping the digital landscape to match the illusion he lived in. But he missed one. I clicked it. The page maximized to reveal a messaging dashboard, a work platform he used nothing unusual on its own, but the thread at the top was open, and my eyes hit the timestamp before they registered the content. Ref LX 12 time, 1907. A line of text from Harper. A reply from Ethan. A location pin. A confirmation. A place he should not have been. A time that contradicted what he told me last night. A digital fracture. Another pulse of truth. I clicked the message and the thread expanded, showing a short exchange where she said she was heading up, and he wrote same spot, and there was a reference to a detail I'd never heard him mention. Room B lights weren't on. My hand went cold. My throat tightened. The sticky note on the desk suddenly felt heavier, like a breadcrumb in a trail he didn't expect me to follow. I scrolled up the conversation, reading tiny fragments of familiarity disguised as work talk, but beneath the surface the tone was wrong, too casual, too quick, too synced. They wrote like people who didn't need to explain context to each other, like people who already shared the missing pieces. I stared so long at the screen that the glare began to blur. When I heard footsteps in the hallway, I froze, not from fear, but calculation. Ethan wasn't supposed to be home for another hour, but schedules didn't seem to matter anymore. I closed the window, but left the tab marked in the browser history. I wanted the contradiction to stay where it could be found later by me, by him, by whoever needed to see it. He stepped into the doorway with that same half-smile he'd used all morning, the one stretched too thin to hold weight. Looking for something, he asked casual, easy, unbothered. I turned just enough to face him, but not enough to show what I saw. "No. Just checking the printer," I said, keeping my tone neutral, keeping the truth behind my teeth. His eyes flicked to the desk, and for a split second something in his expression tightened when he noticed the sticky note wasn't where he left it. It was subtle, almost nothing, but I caught it. A small panic, a flicker, a crack in the facade. I placed the note down flat on the desk, letting my fingers rest on it just long enough to matter. Ethan stepped inside, fully now, pretending confidence, but carrying the stiffness of a man walking around a trap he hoped wasn't armed. "You know, if you need anything in here, just ask," he said lightly, but his voice shook on the last word. Just a tremor. Just enough to expose him. I held his gaze and watched him fight the urge to look at the computer screen. His eyes darted there anyway. A tell, a slip, a confession without sound. People lie with their words, but their eyes confess for them. The air between us thickened into something sharp. He lingered a second too long, searching my face for signs of what I knew, but I gave him nothing. Silence worked better. Silence kept me steady. Silence fed the truth. He eventually turned away, muttering something about running late, but the tremor in his hand when he reached for his keys betrayed him more than any sentence he might have crafted. I waited until he was completely gone before letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd held. Then I opened the thread again. Ref LX12, time 1907, a second date, a hidden coordination, a message that aligned too perfectly with the shadowed scene I'd walked into. I didn't screenshot it yet. I didn't need to. The truth was already writing itself. The sticky note wasn't the clue his panic was. He doesn't know I saw the message he meant to hide. The venue buzzed with the layered noise of people performing happiness glasses, clinking soft laughter, the artificial warmth of polite conversation. But beneath all of it pulsed a tension I could feel in the back of my throat as I stepped inside, scanning the room with a calmness I didn't actually possess. Public spaces had always made Ethan shine. They were his preferred terrain, the place where his charm operated like a polished tool, where people's attention softened the edges of his lies. Tonight was no different. He stood near the center of the room, smiling easily, shaking hands, offering pats on shoulders, like a man who believed the world admired him without question. And maybe they did. They always had. But as I walked through the crowd, weaving past acquaintances and strangers, the room seemed dimmer around him, like even the lights had begun to notice something was off. The first thing that caught my eye wasn't Ethan or Harper. It was the misaligned photo frame on the far wall, hanging 2 degrees lower on the right side, subtle, but wrong enough that it snagged my attention instantly. It didn't belong in this curated space, a venue that prided itself on symmetry and order, and yet there it hung tilted exposed, a quiet symbol of the fracture I'd been feeling expand beneath my feet. I couldn't look away from it for a moment, because it felt like the room itself was nodding toward the truth, nudging me to pay attention, whispering that something here was shifting, whether I welcomed it or not. I forced my gaze back to Ethan, who was mid-laugh with a coworker, his posture relaxed, shoulders squared, voice pitched in that confident tone he used when he wanted to prove ease rather than feel it. Harper stood near him, not touching, but orbiting in a way that vibrated with familiarity. She pretended to scroll her phone, but the tension in her hand betrayed her. People moved around them, greeting, complimenting, filling the air with meaningless chatter. But the three of us existed in a separate current beneath all of it, a slow, electrical hum no one else could hear. I approached the refreshment table to buy myself a vantage point, pretending to choose a drink while watching the reflection in the chrome container across from me. Their silhouettes aligned too comfortably. Their energy matched too naturally. But none of that was evidence not yet. What mattered was timing. What mattered was what I saw when Harper bent down to retrieve something from her bag. The zipper caught the overhead light, and in that flash, I noticed a thin rectangle poking out an open laptop sleeve, its pocket just barely unzipped, and inside it, visible only because of the angle and the mirrored steel beside me, was a printed email fragment, not the whole page, just the top corner. The header line was unmistakable. Ref M43 time, sent 1422. Evidence number 2, the confirmation, the contradiction etched in ink. Harper straightened quickly, almost too quickly, as if she realized something had slipped into view. She pressed the sleeve flat against her side and glanced around, making sure no one had noticed, but her eyes didn't catch the reflection I'd been looking through. She had no idea I'd seen it. I shifted my stance, lifting my glass just enough to disguise my focus, and watched her tuck the sleeve deeper into her bag. The movements were small, careful, guilty. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to betray their coordination. For a brief second, their expressions aligned with the same micro-panic I'd seen in Ethan the day before when the sticky note was out of place. That same flicker, that same tell, They were partners in something, and not just in deceit, but in the choreography of hiding it. Their secret had muscle memory. A coworker approached me asking how I'd been, but their words felt muffled like I was underwater, and I gave a neutral smile, answering lightly while tracking the two figures across the room. I watched Harper inhale, slowly, watched Ethan subtly reposition his stance so he could see her without turning his head. Every movement was a confession. Every glance was another crack in their story. And behind them, just over Ethan's left shoulder, that misaligned photo frame stared at me, off-center crooked wrong, just like them. I sensed the humiliation blooming under my skin, not because they were winning, but because they thought they were. Because they believed the room hid them. Because they believed I couldn't see. But I saw everything. Harper excused herself to the side, pretending to check her messages. Ethan pretended not to notice. Their pretend lives were stitched with the same thread. I stepped closer, blending with a group of guests. The air thickened as Harper pulled the laptop sleeve from her bag to slip the email fragment fully inside. Her hand trembled almost unnoticeably, but enough to betray her nerves. She caught me looking. Her entire posture froze. A split second. Barely anything. But it was all the confirmation I needed. I offered a polite smile. She dropped her gaze instantly, returned to Ethan's orbit like a planet snapping into place. My stomach tightened, but not with pain, with clarity, with alignment, with something colder than anger and sharper than confrontation. I shifted my focus to Ethan. He sensed my stare even before he turned. His smile faltered half a second of cracking veneer, then he lifted it again, too fast, too forced. I raised my glass slightly in acknowledgement, and the effort he made to look relaxed was almost laughable. His voice rose an octave as he resumed talking to the group, his laugh emerging 10% too loud, the way liars sound when they think noise can cover guilt. It can't. Not tonight. Not in this room. Not while the truth keeps pushing through the cracks like a light that refuses to dim. I walked past them both, letting my shoulder angle just within their line of sight, not close enough to speak, but close enough that they felt the pressure of my presence. The public performance around us continued, servers moving guests, greeting one another, music drifting softly overhead, but the three of us existed in a private storm. And the misaligned photo frame loomed in my peripheral vision, as though the entire room was leaning toward one truth. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. Their fear was already louder than any accusation I could deliver. Some people panic at the slightest shift because they know the truth is closing in. The room sees more than they realize. He doesn't know the email in her bag already belongs to me. The house felt colder than usual when I returned that evening, not in temperature, but in atmosphere, as if the walls had grown thinner, and the quiet inside had become something skeletal and brittle, ready to splinter if the wrong thought brushed against it. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muffled tick of the hallway clock, the distant drone of traffic outside, normal sounds that now carried a strange emptiness beneath them, like they no longer belonged to the life I thought I was living. The lights were low, leaving shadows in the corners of each room, and when I stepped into the kitchen, the first thing I touched was the cold countertop, its chill cutting into my palm, as if reminding me where I stood, grounding me in the present, while the truth I'd been uncovering pulled me backward through timelines I hadn't yet understood. I opened a drawer looking for nothing in particular, just needing to move to avoid the gravity of the thoughts circling in my head, and that's when I saw it tucked near the back of the second drawer, a small folded piece of thermal paper. I pulled it out slowly, my pulse tightening in my throat as I unfolded it and saw the numbers printed faintly across the top. Receipt number A812. Timestamp 1605. The ink was slightly smudged, as if someone had handled it too many times or tried to crumple it before thinking better of it. I held it closer to the light, tracing the line of the timestamp, letting the meaning settle into place. Ethan had claimed he was at a meeting across town at 4:01 that supposedly lasted until 500. A meeting with his boss. A meeting he sighed about all week. A meeting he pretended to dread. But the store listed on the receipt wasn't anywhere near his office, wasn't anywhere near the place he said he'd be. And there was no reason he needed to be at that store. Not on that day, not at that time, not when he'd insisted he was stuck in conference room B with half the team. My fingers tightened around the thin paper until it crackled. The cold countertop pressed against my hip as I leaned back trying to steady myself, breathing slow and deliberate so I didn't lose the clarity forming in my chest. I replayed the day in my mind, the text he sent at 5:15, saying he was exhausted, the way he came home slightly out of breath, the faint smell of cologne that didn't match his own. The timeline fractured cleanly now, splitting into two incompatible halves. And the truth was so simple, it made my stomach tighten. He'd lied. Not in a vague, plausible deniability way. A precise way. A timestamp-breaking way. A way that dragged Harper into the timeline without her even being present in the room. I placed the receipt flat on the cold surface, letting the chill seep into my fingertips. The cut of light from the nearby window cast a narrow, bright bar across it, illuminating the numbers like the universe wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. I didn't. I couldn't. My body held still, but my mind moved fast. It connected the sticky note. It connected the screenshot. It connected the email fragment hiding in Harper's bag. Every piece aligned with a frightening sense of purpose, as if the truth had always been there waiting for me to gather enough courage to see it plainly. I walked to the sink and turned on the faucet, not because I needed water, but because I needed the noise, something to keep the silence from swallowing the room. But even under the running water, I could hear the thin crack in my own breath, the quiet acknowledgement that part of me already knew what these pieces meant. I dried my hands and moved toward the living room, glancing down the hall where Ethan's office door sat closed now perfectly, no longer slightly ajar. He'd noticed. He'd corrected it. He thought closing the door rewrote the truth. It didn't. The cold countertop still pressed its memory into my skin as I paced the space, reviewing every detail from the past week, searching for the moment when suspicion had first crept into my bones. I remembered the conversation we'd had in the car 3 days ago, the slight tremor in his voice when I asked if he'd be home late. I remembered the way he flinched when he thought I'd seen a notification on his phone. I remembered how Harper avoided me at the last event we all attended. Her smile tight, her eyes darting past mine as if afraid of what she saw in them. The lights dimmed slightly as the evening deepened, and I found myself walking back to the kitchen, drawn to the countertop again like it held gravity. I picked up the receipt and pressed my thumb against the timestamp, holding it there, as if pressure could force the truth deeper into the paper. But the truth was already deep enough. I spread the receipt next to Ethan's schedule printed earlier in the week, comparing times tracing gaps. The contradiction glowed. He didn't even try to hide it well, not really. Or maybe he did, but I'd finally stopped trying to protect him from his own lies. I reached for my phone thumb, hovering over the screen, debating whether to photograph the receipt now or wait. I decided to wait. Not out of hesitation, but strategy. This wasn't the moment to collect digital proof. This was the moment to understand its weight, the moment to let the fracture widen quietly, the moment to let the truth breathe. Footsteps sounded faintly outside neighbors. Not Ethan, but the noise still tightened something in my chest before releasing it. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I was something colder, calmer, sharper, something that didn't shake anymore. I placed the receipt gently inside a drawer I knew he never opened, laying it flat between 2 unused cookbooks. Then I turned off the kitchen light, letting the glow from the window be the only illumination. The house returned to its brittle quiet. The cold countertop held its chill, and I exhaled without rushing, letting the breath settle into the new shape the truth had carved into my life. His timeline didn't just slip, it shattered. The cold countertop told the truth before he ever will. He has no idea the receipt already rewrote everything. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out of shallow stretches of consciousness, while the house breathed around me, each creak in the wood and each shift in the air, feeling like a reminder that the truth was pushing closer, whether I wanted it or not. And when dawn finally cracked through the blinds in a thin, unforgiving slash of light, I felt the weight of the timeline pressing against my chest, like a quiet demand to move, to look, to understand what the receipt and the email and the screenshot had been circling around all along. I walked into the kitchen, with the same hollow steadiness I used whenever I needed to dissect something painful, and the moment I opened the drawer to grab a pen, the edge of a metallic reflection hit my eye, the knife glare sharp and cold, bouncing off the blade of the chef's knife resting beside the cutting board. The reflection was so precise it felt like it sliced directly into the memory of Ethan's voice the night before his casual lies, his feigned ease. That narrow line of light across the metal reminded me of the cut light line motif I kept seeing uninvited in places where truth waited to be noticed. I reached past the knife, pulling out a stack of old printer paper I hadn't touched in months, and carried them to the dining table. My laptop waited there, blank screen glowing faintly in the dim morning, and I already knew what I needed to look for. Ethan's deleted calls, his hidden timelines, his digital trail he swore didn't exist. He underestimated me, or he overestimated the strength of whatever story he'd constructed with Harper. Either way, the mistake belonged to him, not me. I logged into our shared phone account, the one he always forgot, synced automatically across devices. For years, it had been an inconvenience. Today, it was a truth generator. When the call history loaded, I felt my pulse tighten as dozens of entries filled the screen. Normal calls, work calls, family calls, and then the gaps appeared, empty spaces, missing durations, deleted entries that looked too clean to be accidental. One in particular caught my eye. Call ID 02F. Ethan's number. Duration. No minutes, no seconds, just a dash. A blank where time should have been. I clicked it. The screen hesitated, then revealed a partial metadata trail fragments that the system hadn't wiped when Ethan tried to delete the call. A backup sync he forgot about. A tiny oversight that cracked his entire timeline open like a bone snapping under pressure. The metadata revealed 2 start times, not 1. 2. The phone had registered the call beginning at 1842, but the network logged a different opening at 1847. 5 minutes apart. A duration mismatch. A broken alibi. A call that existed in 2 places at once, just like he did. The moment I saw it, the truth clicked into place with a violence so quiet it felt surgical. And then the motif echo slid through me like a whispered warning. Another pulse skips as the broken call log flickers. I leaned back slowly, my fingers hovering above the keyboard, as if the truth radiated heat. Ethan wasn't just hiding mistakes. He was hiding coordination. He had called Harper during a period he specifically told me he was in a meeting. And not just any meeting, a meeting he blamed for missing dinner with me. A meeting he acted exhausted from. A meeting he had described in detail, down to what his boss had said and how the whiteboard marker squeaked each time someone wrote something. He lied with choreography, with confidence, with rehearsed precision, and the call log held the knife that sliced straight through all of it. I printed the metadata immediately, watching the warm paper slide out of the machine, with the mismatched timestamps circling my mind like vultures around a carcass. As I lifted it, the knife glare from the kitchen caught my eye again, reflecting against the faucet now as the rising sun brightened the room. A cold, deliberate glint. A reminder. A mirror of the cut in his story. When Ethan finally walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and stretching like a man who believed the world still aligned with him, he nearly bumped into me at the counter. His expression flashed with something too quick to identify: fear, annoyance, before smoothing into his usual facade. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone level, my face blank. He moved toward the fridge, reaching for the handle, but I saw the way his eyes flicked not at me, not at the counter, but at the printer page in my hand. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. People rarely notice their own microtics, but I cataloged his, every one, every slip, every flicker. He grabbed the milk too quickly, nearly dropping it, and forced a laugh to cover the sound of the plastic sliding awkwardly against the shelf. "What's that you're working on?" he asked too casually, nodding toward the paper with that strained attempt at nonchalance he used whenever he felt a truth getting too close. I held the printout at my side without hiding it and just watched him. Watched his eyes, watched the way they darted to the knife glare on the counter, as if he feared what I might be capable of now that the timeline was turning against him. Nothing I said, just sorting old files. He nodded once too fast, then turned away and pretended to focus on his coffee. But his hands shook. Barely. Just enough. People don't fear lies, they fear the moment someone stops believing them. I stepped out of the kitchen before he could ask anything else, leaving him alone with the glare of the knife and the crack in his story widening behind him like a growing fault line. Upstairs, I laid the printed metadata beside the receipt, the sticky note, the mental snapshot of the screenshot, and the memory of the email in Harper's bag. A pattern emerged, undeniable and damning. A pattern that wasn't coincidence, but choreography. And I knew with a clarity that made my breath steady rather than shake that the next move wasn't theirs. It was mine. He doesn't realize the broken call log just opened the door he can't close. I didn't plan to see Dean that day. But once the broken call log had settled into the weight of my chest like a truth-shaped stone, I knew the next piece wouldn't come from Ethan or Harper. It would come from someone who didn't even realize he was holding it, someone neutral, someone with no reason to lie for either of them. The venue manager was always polite in a distant procedural way, and when I stepped inside his office that afternoon, the air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and laminate cleaner sterile calm, completely unaffected by the chaos unraveling inside my home. Dean sat behind his desk with a clipboard in hand and a clicking pen tapping rhythmically against the paper, a sound sharper than it needed to be steady and precise in the quiet. He looked up when I entered, offering a small nod, his expression professional but curious. I told him I needed to confirm some details about the previous event, keeping my voice level, letting the neutrality of my tone hide the urgency beneath it. The clicking of the pen stopped as he gestured for me to sit. He flipped through a set of neatly organized papers, the sound of shifting sheets filling the room with a low crispness. "What do you need?" "Exactly," he asked, leaning slightly forward, and I watched the way his eyes narrowed just enough to show he took his job seriously. I explained I needed confirmation on scheduling a technicality. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. And while the lie tasted metallic on my tongue, the calmness in my delivery kept it alive. Dean nodded, then turned to his computer. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease, and the pen in his other hand resumed its quiet rhythm. That clicking became a metronome, keeping time with my pulse as the screen lit up. "We log everything he said almost apologetically, as if too much record-keeping might embarrass him. Cameras, sign-ins, hallway access, keeps things clean. Clean." The word echoed in my mind like a challenge. If only my marriage had been documented with that level of clarity. He clicked through menus, scrolling past feed logs and audio alerts until he paused at a video file labeled with a familiar date. The same day, Ethan told me he stayed late for an emergency review. The same night, I caught the trembling shadows. My breath anchored itself in the center of my chest, waiting. Dean dragged the progress bar to a specific segment. Cam 4's usually the clearest, he said. Covers the back hallway right outside the restricted rooms. He didn't know the significance of what lived in that hallway. Not yet. The screen loaded, resolving into the grainy gray view of a dim corridor lined with closed doors. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the timestamp flickered 0017. The hum of the computer fan grew louder. Dean leaned back, folding his arms, unaware that the world was shifting under my ribs. And then they appeared. Ethan, Harper. Entering the frame with the too familiar synchrony of people who had been somewhere they shouldn't have been together. Ethan's head was lowered like he was listening closely. Harper's hand lifted to tuck a stray hair behind her ear in a gesture I'd seen her do around him too many times. The camera caught everything: their proximity, the casual tilt of their bodies toward one another, the shared glance that lingered a beat too long. Dean didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His job was to observe the footage, not the fallout. "Lighting's dim back there," he said. "We've been meaning to fix it." But the dimness only sharpened the truth. The hallway wasn't dark enough to hide their coordination. At 0021, Ethan's hand brushed Harper's arm. Not a full touch, just enough to suggest the muscle memory of something deeper. My stomach tightened with a cold clarity rather than pain. I leaned in without realizing it. my eyes tracking every movement as if the footage had hypnotized me. No theatrics, no accusations, just truth, clean and unfiltered. The kind of truth people only reveal when they think they're unobserved. The timestamp clicked forward, 00:27. Harper looked over her shoulder, and her expression shifted furtive alert. Ethan stepped closer. Too close. A breath shared in the dimness. Their shadows merged briefly into one shape. And in that moment, the lie they'd both been protecting folded open like a cheap envelope. Dean paused the video naturally. Nothing dramatic about the gesture, just routine maintenance. "We archive these after 30 days, he said. "Did you need a copy of this segment?" I swallowed, holding my voice steady. "Just need to verify who was where. This is helpful." He nodded, satisfied. He didn't see my fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. He didn't hear the slice of betrayal settling into place like a blade gliding into its sheath. The clicking pen resumed its rhythm, tapping against the clipboard with sharp precision, and something about the sound made the moment feel even more surgical, clean, painless, a truth extracted without emotion. Evidence number 5, CCTV, Cam 400-17-0033, settled into my mind like a steel puzzle piece locking into its final position. Cameras don't lie, they just wait for people to expose themselves. I thanked Dean with a calmness that surprised even me, and he handed me a printed log of the hallway access times, unaware he'd just given me another piece I didn't even ask for, another timestamp, another contradiction, another slice of truth. As I stepped out of his office, the pen's clicking still echoed in my ears, each tap marking another beat of a life shifting irreversibly toward confrontation. The hallway outside felt colder, as if the building itself recognized what I carried now, not suspicion, not fear, proof, absolute proof. And Ethan had no idea it existed. He doesn't know the camera caught the moment he stopped being careful. The house felt unnervingly still that evening, holding the kind of quiet that makes you suspicious of your own footsteps. And when I stepped into the kitchen, the faint fridge hum pressed against the silence, like a thin electrical warning, low and steady, vibrating through the tiles beneath my feet, as if the appliance itself sensed the truth tightening around the edges of my life. I stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing, letting the accumulated evidence settle in the back of my mind like sediment finally sinking to the bottom of a glass. I didn't want more truth. I didn't even go looking for it. But truth has a way of finding the person who stopped running from it. My phone buzzed on the counter, its screen lighting up against the dim room, and when I saw Clara's name flash across it, a cold ripple moved down my spine. Clara never called after shifts, unless something weighted sat in her chest. I answered with a small, steady, "Hey," and her voice came through soft but edged with hesitation. "Are you home?" she asked. "Yeah. I need to tell you something. I didn't think it mattered before, but now I don't know. I think it does." The fridge hum filled the pause between her words. It felt almost intrusive. "Tell me," I said. She exhaled a tired breath from a long day on her feet. "I saw Harper at the clinic last week." My grip tightened around the phone. "Which clinic? Mine?" The hum grew louder in my ears, or maybe my heartbeat did hard to tell with the pulse tangled under my ribs. "She came in late," Clara continued, her voice dipping lower, kind of flustered like she wasn't expecting to run into anyone she knew. She didn't check in under her own name at first. She hesitated before giving it. A silence stretched. Sharp. Tense. And... "What time was this?" I asked. Another pause. Another beat syncing with the hum. I logged it. 18:30. My jaw clenched. My breath stilled. "Clara." I said, "What exactly did she come in for?" "I can't tell you everything," she said gently, "but I can tell you it wasn't work-related." And she left quickly. Nervous. Jumpier than usual. The hum droned on, a frigid mechanical heartbeat anchoring me in place. She hesitated again before adding, "I didn't want to say anything before because I didn't know if it meant anything. But after what you told me last night, it fits too neatly with the rest." When we ended the call, I stood at the counter motionless, the fridge humming its steady note, while my eyes fixed on a magnet holding a stack of forgotten takeout menus. I pulled the magnet aside and watched the papers slip the soft flutter, sounding like a quiet unraveling. Something thin and flat slid out from between them, a paper I didn't remember placing there. A folded slip. I unfolded it with careful fingers, and the clinic's logo, stamped across the top, hit me like a cold surge. Intake log H59, time 1830, evidence number 6. Clara must have tucked it there earlier, not wanting to hand it to me directly in case I wasn't ready. The hum deepened. The room tightened. I traced the timestamp with a slow, deliberate touch. 1830. The same night Ethan claimed Harper was helping coordinate an outreach event 3 miles away. The same night he'd said he didn't hear from her until later. The same night he claimed he was swamped at work. A triple contradiction. Their entire timeline bent at the exact same minute. He wasn't just lying. She wasn't just lying. They were synchronizing their lies like two people rehearsing a routine. I pressed the slip flat on the counter, letting the cold surface beneath it seep into my skin. The cut light line from the window stretched slowly across the kitchen as the sun fell lower, touching the intake slip like a spotlight revealing something important, something final. I remembered the way Harper flinched when she saw me at the event. I remembered Ethan's sudden nervousness around the printer logs. I remembered how their glances aligned too cleanly, too effortlessly, like people who had practiced covering one another's movements. And now, with this intake slip, the last gap in their story snapped shut. I opened the group photo Ethan had taken at the outreach event that night. He'd sent it to me casually, smiling wide in the frame with 3 coworkers, a manufactured alibi. But in the reflection behind him, blurred faint, was a digital clock on the wall. 1842. 12 minutes after Harper was at the clinic. 11 minutes after Ethan claimed he was still prepping materials. I zoomed in. The numbers held steady. The truth held steady. The hum of the fridge continued its low, unrelenting drone, filling the kitchen with a tension that felt almost physical. "Ethan," I whispered to no one. "You weren't even trying to be careful." I gathered the evidence receipt screenshot, call log, the envelope of truths forming a pattern even they couldn't outrun, and aligned the pages neatly on the counter, the cold surface reflecting small sparks of the overhead light. My hand stopped shaking. My breath steadied. I wasn't unraveling. I was clarifying. And clarity was more dangerous than anger ever could be. Some lies break quietly, others split the entire timeline in half. Their stories didn't just overlap, they collapsed into the same minute. I lifted the intake slip one last time, holding it between my fingers like a final piece sliding into place. He doesn't realize the clinic timestamp just erased the story he built. I didn't ease into the decision. I crashed into it the way a glass shatters the moment it realizes the floor is no longer beneath it, because by the time evening settled across the house like a tight, suffocating film, I understood that whatever came next wouldn't be born from patience, but from precision, and the precision I needed demanded I stop pretending there was anything left to salvage. The evidence I had gathered didn't tremble or hesitate. It stacked itself into a structure too sharp to ignore, and as I moved through the dim living room, every object felt like it was watching me prepare for something final. I reached into the drawer beside the entry table and pulled out the crumpled receipt I had tucked there weeks earlier, smoothing its wrinkles enough to reveal the numbers again, number 88-112, time 1605. It felt like a relic now, a first fracture, a quiet warning of a truth that had been clawing toward daylight long before I agreed to see it. I held it in my palm as I crossed the room, letting its edges bite into my skin, letting the memory of that first contradiction thread itself into my breath. The air felt charged, waiting. My laptop sat on the coffee table, still open from the night before its screen dimmed, but not asleep, and when I tapped the trackpad, the browser window bloomed instantly to life. The folder where I'd been collecting fragments of Ethan's lies stared back at me. I opened a new search window, keyed in the recovery software I'd downloaded earlier that afternoon, and followed the steps with the kind of detachment a surgeon uses when cutting into a body that no longer holds a living person inside. The software churned through Ethan's deleted messages, those fragments he thought had vanished into dust when he cleared his phone. But deletion isn't erasure, not when the truth wants to be found. The progress bar crawled across the screen, slow but merciless. When it reached 70%, the first partial lines appeared half-typed phrases, unsent drafts, stray timestamps. None of them mattered until the program flagged one with a bright red icon. Recovered draft ID 7C-RM, evidence number 7. I clicked it. The screen expanded into a single message thread, resurrected from the phone's memory like something exhumed. It wasn't long, it wasn't poetic, it wasn't even careful. It was worse, it was familiar. Harper, we can't talk here anymore. She's watching too closely. Same plan. Keep your phone on. Delete this. And below it, another line unfinished but damning. We'll tell them it was just work. No period, no hesitation, just a sentence mid-breath, the kind a person writes when they think they'll have time later to refine their lie. My hands went cold, not shaking, steady, deadly steady. This wasn't suspicion or speculation or emotional distortion. This was strategy in writing. This was coordination. This was an instruction manual for deception, and he'd deleted it because he knew what it meant. I read it 3 times, each pass burning deeper into the hollow space beneath my ribs, and then I printed it, letting the page slide out warm and weightless, fragile in appearance, but heavier than any proof I'd held so far. The hum of the printer sounded like a countdown. I placed the printed draft beside the crumpled receipt, aligning their corners carefully, as if the neatness mattered, as if the organization of lies could somehow rewrite the chaos they'd created. I glanced at the clock. Ethan would be home soon. Good. I wasn't afraid of him walking into the truth waiting here. I was counting on it. The house felt too still, too expectant, like it knew what was coming even before I spoke it aloud. I began collecting everything, the screenshot, the email fragment memory, the CCTV timestamps, the call log mismatch, the clinic intake slip. Each one landed on the table like a stone building a structure meant to collapse on him. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't hesitating. I wasn't spiraling. I was assembling. The sound of a car door closing outside snapped the air tight. Tires on gravel. Footsteps. Keys jangling. My breath slowed to a razor-thin thread. The doorknob turned. The door opened. Ethan stepped inside with the false ease of a man who believed routine would rescue him. He said something about traffic, about dinner, about being exhausted, but his voice blurred into static as I stared at him with a clarity I'd never felt before. He noticed the papers. He noticed my posture. He noticed the silence. His face flickered worry, calculation, fear, before settling into the smile he used like a shield. "What's all this?" he asked. Too light, too thin, too late. I didn't answer him at first. I just held the crumpled receipt up between us, letting it dangle like a verdict. His eyes tightened. "Morgan," he started, stepping forward. I stepped back. Then I placed the receipt on the table with the others, moving slowly, deliberately. His gaze followed my hands like they were weapons. Good. He finally understood the gravity of what he was standing in front of. I reached for the last page, the recovered draft, the one that would break him. His breath stalled when he saw the header. He recognized it instantly. "Where did you deleted it?" I said, my voice level stripped of tremor. "But that only works if the person you're lying to wants to stay blind." He swallowed, throat twitching. "This isn't what you think." "Then say what it is." Silence. A thick, desperate silence. Cowards hide behind silence because the truth would destroy the story they rehearsed. His eyes darted to the door, then to the table, then to me. No escape routes left. I placed the recovered draft at the center of the evidence pile. He stared at it like it was a detonator. "It's over," I said quietly. "I'm done watching you try to bury the truth." He opened his mouth, but the lie died before it reached air. I didn't need yelling. I didn't need tears. I didn't need theatrics. I needed precision, and I had it. He doesn't realize the draft he deleted is the one that destroys him. The night of the event arrived wrapped in a charged kind of quiet, the kind that sits on the edge of something sharp, and as I stood outside the venue watching guests stream in beneath strings of warm lights, Every detail in the air felt too precise, too intentional, as if the universe itself understood that this was the moment the timeline would collapse into one unavoidable truth. I kept my posture steady, my breath even, my steps controlled, because whatever storm waited inside belonged to Ethan and Harper, not me, and the calmness in my chest felt like the final evolution of everything they'd forced me to see. The moment I walked through the doors, the noise hit me. 200 voices, layered over soft music, the clatter of glasses, the shifting of chairs, the performative brightness people wear at gatherings like this. And beneath it all, a low current of expectation, as if the room sensed a fault line trembling under its own floorboards. I scanned the space. Ethan stood near the center with that polished confidence he always wore in public, smiling too easily, shaking hands, laughing a fraction too loudly. Harper hovered nearby, not touching him, but orbiting with the same gravitational pull I'd watched grow over months. Their eyes met more often than they should have. Their spacing was too familiar. Their bodies spoke a language they believed no one else understood. But tonight, I didn't need body language. I didn't need suspicion. I had evidence number 8 already tucked neatly in my jacket pocket, the bank slip with the coded transaction, the transfer from an account ending in 18-4, a sum too significant and too hidden to be innocent. Ethan had denied ever sending money to Harper, denied supporting anything outside our joint expenses, denied every financial fracture I'd pieced together. But the slip told the truth he couldn't bury. He'd been paying for something, or someone. And the timing aligned perfectly painfully with every lie that had carried us to this point. I stepped into the crowd, slowly letting the noise swallow my presence until I became nothing more than another guest in the blur. People greeted me, smiled, complimented my dress, unaware that I was carrying the final cut of a long, deliberate dismantling. I moved toward the stage as the lights dimmed as the host took the microphone as the room settled into its polite hush. Ethan glanced at me from across the space, a quick assessment, a flash of confusion at my composure. Good. Confusion was the first crack. Harper's eyes widened just slightly when she noticed I wasn't avoiding either of them. Good. Fear was the second crack. The host invited Ethan forward for a short speech, something routine, something rehearsed, and as he walked toward the center, adjusting his collar, clearing his throat, preparing to perform, I felt the certainty settle through me like cool steel. His voice started smooth, confident, carrying across the room in warm, empty arcs. People clapped softly, smiling, unaware of the truth sitting just beneath the surface. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. The phone screen glare hit first bright, clean, sharp, catching the attention of the people nearest me as I stepped forward. The glare alone was enough to turn Ethan's head mid-sentence, his voice faltering on a syllable he never recovered. I lifted the bank slip beside the screen, the light washing across the paper, illuminating the account number ending in 18-4, the transfer amount, the timestamp that matched the night he'd claimed he was working late. The audience didn't understand yet. Ethan did. His face drained so fast it looked like the light had sucked the color out of him. Harper froze behind a cluster of guests, her hand flying to her chest as if she'd been physically struck. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I didn't speak a single word. I didn't need to. The truth glowed in my hand, projected by the glare of the phone screen for every nearby guest to see. The people closest gasped. A few stepped back. Someone whispered, "Is that another voice cut in?" But he said, Ethan stammered, "Morgan, what are you, there's an explanation. Listen, please." But panic strangled his words, twisting them into fragments. He stepped toward me, then glanced desperately at Harper, who stood rigid, exposed by nothing more than proximity and fear. I held the bank slip higher. Murmurs rippled across the room as the nearest guests leaned in, reading the figures, connecting the implications the way humans do when the pieces drop too neatly into place. And then someone in the crowd, someone who had no stake in this story at all, whispered the truth out loud. He was paying her. The room snapped open like a wound. Ethan reached out a trembling hand as if he could pull the air back into place. "It's not what you think, please. Just let's go outside. Let's talk." I stepped back, letting his grasp fall into empty space. My voice, when it finally emerged, was steady enough to silence half the room. No more talking. The host lowered the microphone. People exchanged glances, whispering, pulling out their own phones, the glow of their screens turning the room into a constellation of witnesses. Harper tried to move, but someone blocked her by accident, trapping her in the truth she'd helped create. I turned the bank slip toward her next. Her eyes filled not with remorse, but with calculation, the frantic math of someone trying to save themselves. She failed. Ethan sagged forward, his hands shaking, his breath coming shallow and panicked. "Morgan, stop, please!" Guilt sounds the same in every language. It's the tremor people can't hide. The crowd held its collective breath as I folded the bank slip once, twice, then slipped it back into my jacket. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had already done the speaking. Ethan covered his face with both hands. Harper looked away, shoulders caving inward. 200 witnesses stood suspended in the kind of silence that rearranges a room permanently. He has no idea this wasn't the final blow. It was only the warning. I didn't walk after him immediately. I let the weight of the room settle first, let the whispers turn into a low electric rustle behind me. Let Harper vanish into the crowd with the frantic quickness of someone trying to outrun the shape of her own name, because Part 10 wasn't the end. It was only the fracture the truth needed to open fully. When I finally stepped outside, the night air hit me with a cold sharpness that felt more like clarity than chill. The sky hung heavy and black above the parking lot lights, and Ethan stood hunched near the far railing's shoulders, caved hands gripping the metal as though it might steady him. For the first time in months, maybe years, he looked small. I approached slowly, not to be dramatic, but because I wanted every step to be the truth he couldn't avoid. Past tense shaped every breath between us now. When he turned, his face was washed in that pale yellow glow that reveals every crack in a person, the tremor in his jaw, the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the red-rimmed panic in his eyes. "Morgan." He managed, his voice breaking under the weight of everything he'd tried to hold together. "Please, you can't just please talk to me." I stopped about 5 feet from him, enough distance to make the truth visible. The cold wind slid down the back of my neck, nudging my hair across my shoulder, and in that moment, something quiet inside me finally clicked into place. Behind him on the venue's little wooden service table, a faint desk scratch ran crooked across the surface, subtle, almost invisible, but impossible to miss once you saw it. It reminded me of every small wound that had accumulated between us. Every microfracture he insisted didn't mean anything, every dismissed feeling, every brushed-off concern. That scratch was the object anchoring this moment, the visible mark of damage that couldn't be undone. Ethan followed my eyes and saw the way they lingered on it. "What do you want me to say?" He asked, the words fragile and desperate. "Tell the truth," I said. "All of it." He swallowed hard. His mouth opened again. Lies struggled to form, but they cracked in his throat like shattered glass. And then he deflated shoulders, collapsing as the last of his practiced composure drained out of him. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he whispered. "We didn't mean stop," I said, not loudly, but with enough force to make him flinch. "Don't say we. Own your part." For a long stretch of silence, the only sound was the hum of distant traffic and the faint vibration of the venue's HVAC rumbling through the walls behind us. Then Ethan spoke again, quieter. "I didn't love her," he said. It was messy and stupid, and it got out of control." "You sent her money," I said. "You coordinated lies. You wrote drafts about how to hide me." He closed his eyes. "I know. And you still walked into the house every night acting like nothing was wrong. Because I didn't want to lose you," he said, his voice cracking. "I was scared." I let the words hang there cold and limp. Fear wasn't an excuse. Fear was the fuel for every manipulator who didn't want consequences. People don't cheat because they're unhappy. They cheat because they think they can get away with it. He blinked, hard tears clinging to the corners of his eyes. "I can fix this," he said, voice trembling. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll cut her off completely. I'll go to counseling." Ethan," I said softly. "There's nothing left to fix." He stepped forward, reaching out, but his hand hovered in midair, as if even he knew it had no right to land on me anymore. "Don't do this," he pleaded. "Don't end us like this." "I didn't end us," I said. "You did. Piece by piece, lie by lie, scratch by scratch." His gaze fell to the desk, scratch beside him, and something in his face collapsed entirely, as though he finally understood the metaphor the universe had carved beneath his hand. The wind pushed a strand of hair across my cheek. I didn't move it. I didn't need to. Everything about me felt anchored, steady, final. Ethan tried again, voice shaking. "Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix it. Tell me how to make you believe me again." I looked at him, not with anger, not with grief, but with the kind of clarity that comes after you've stopped bleeding. "You can't," I said, "because belief isn't something you get back. It's something you protect. And you didn't." His breath stuttered. He covered his mouth with his hand, pressing hard as if he could physically hold in the pieces of himself that were finally breaking open. Behind him, the scratched desk caught the passing beam of a car's headlights, glinting just long enough to reveal its depth, shallow but permanent. Like every wound he'd brushed off, like every lie he'd insisted didn't matter, like every subtle shift in his voice I'd trained myself to ignore. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder of evidence, and set it gently on the table beside the scratch. Not as a gesture of anger, just a record of what had already been done. "What am I supposed to do now?" he whispered. "Live with it," I said, "the way I had to live with not knowing." He dropped onto the bench behind him, elbows on his knees, staring at the ground like it might offer instructions on how to reassemble himself. I stepped back once, twice. The cold air wrapped around me, steady and clean, unburdened. I didn't need to watch him crumble. I didn't need closure from him. The closure was the truth, and the truth was complete. Some endings aren't explosions, they're quiet exits. He finally understands the damage he carved was never invisible to me. He doesn't realize the real ending won't happen until I walk back inside, alone. Morning settles over the neighborhood in a pale, unhurried light, and for the first time in months, the quiet inside the house feels like quiet. Not a warning, not a wait, just an ordinary silence that doesn't demand anything from me. I stand near the front door with my jacket half zipped, the cool air seeping in through the frame as I tie my shoes, and the moment I tug the laces tight, I notice one of them hanging unevenly, a loose shoelace, simple and ordinary. The kind of detail that would have annoyed me before all this, but now feels strangely symbolic, like a small reminder that life doesn't need to be perfect to be stable. I kneel to fix it again, fingers working the fabric slowly, deliberately grounding myself in the tactile certainty of the moment. Everything around me is still. The floor doesn't creak. The fridge doesn't hum. The house doesn't hold its breath. It simply exists with me instead of against me. When I rise, the light spills across the floor in a narrow cut, just like it did the night I saw them together. But today, it doesn't feel like a blade, more like a doorway, a clean line dividing what came before and what comes next. I walk toward the window, pulling the curtain aside, just far enough to see the yard outside. The air looks sharper out there, as if the world is eager to reset itself, now that truth has finished carving its marks. My breath comes easily, no tension, no skipped heartbeat, just steady air filling steady lungs. I let my hand rest on the back of a chair, the wood cool beneath my fingers, and I realize I'm not replaying last night, not reliving Ethan's collapse or Harper's panic, or the way 200 people watched the truth open like a wound neither of them could close. I'm not replaying the pain. I'm not replaying anything. I'm simply here, present, unburdened. My pulse steadies where their lies end. The words settle in my chest, quiet and clean, not a declaration, not a wound, just a truth that finally fits. I glance at the table where the folder used to sit, every piece of proof, every contradiction, every timestamp. The surface is empty now, not because I destroyed the evidence, but because I don't need it anymore. The truth has already done its work. Ethan isn't here. He hasn't called. He hasn't knocked on the door. And for the first morning in too long, I don't wonder where he is or what he's thinking. His absence doesn't sting. It doesn't soothe. It simply means nothing now. I move through the house, slowly touching the back of a chair, adjusting the corner of a frame, letting the space reacquaint itself with my body. The energy is different without his lies humming underneath everything, lighter, sharper, honest. Outside, a car passes its tires, whispering against the pavement, and the normalcy of the sound anchors me even further. I realize how much noise I had grown used to, the noise of suspicion, of doubt, of timelines I kept trying to stitch back together. Now there is only quiet, the kind that doesn't lie. I slip into my jacket and open the door. Crisp air washes over me. Somewhere down the street, a lawn sprinkler ticks rhythmically, steady and predictable. A dog barks once, distant but familiar. None of it feels threatening. None of it feels heavy. I step onto the porch, the loose shoelace tied cleanly now, its knot firm under my fingers. I walk down the steps slowly, letting the air fill my lungs, letting the morning settle around me with the calm certainty of a world no longer tilted by someone else's choices. I reach the sidewalk and pause just long enough to feel the warmth of sunlight against my cheek, just long enough to let myself acknowledge the shift inside me. Not a dramatic surge, not a triumphant shout, but something quieter, steadier, earned. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet breath you finally recognize as your own. I start walking. Leaves rustle along the curb, brushing against my shoes, as if the world wants to remind me it's still moving, still unfolding, still offering something beyond the ruins of what fell apart. My steps are not rushed, not hesitant. They are simply steady, certain, true. Ahead of me, the street stretches open, unburdened by lies, uncluttered by the weight I carried for too long. I tighten my jacket against the breeze and keep walking, each step stronger than the last. The future feels lighter when you stop carrying someone else's darkness. And today, finally, I am carrying only myself.